being live streamed.
Just got an email from Shauna. She is running a little late.
Yeah, Ina as the co-host so she can admit folks.
All right, keep an eye out for Shauna, Ina.
Yes, I will. Thank you.
Okay, we are live Housing Committee of the Tompkins County IDA. Who's the chair of this committee?
That would be me.
Okay,
So I
take
guess
away, John.
I will call to order the April 21st meeting of the Housing Committee of the Tompkins County Industrial Development Agency. Do we have, I guess, right, this being a committee meeting, do we do privilege of the floor and this, that, and the other thing?
Nope.
Okay, great. So I assume everyone's got the agenda. Do we have any changes to the agenda? Hearing none, we can get started with our first item, which is discussing proposed edits to the workforce housing policy. I guess just to introduce the issue, was everyone here on the committee last time we met when we discussed this, or we have some new members? Essentially, we have an existing workforce housing policy. There are some proposed changes to that policy, which we've been discussing. The most significant of which really relates to the delayed payment of the Community Housing Development Fund payment, which is essentially discussed at the IDA board level, and there was some interest in essentially disincentivizing, delaying the payment and coming up with some kind of a policy-based structure for what would happen when that payment was delayed in terms of, would we charge some extra fee or interest or something to cover, the delay. Heather has prepared and attached some a proposed document. Nels and Heather and I met and discussed the proposed changes. And then there's also a spreadsheet which Heather can share that I prepared showing what it would look like if we charge some sort of what I would describe as commercially reasonable interest on the delay of payment. I guess, do we want to sort of go around the room and discuss the edits or?
So I will just add, I included the minutes from the last Housing Committee meeting. So for those of you that might not remember or might not have been members of the committee at that time, they were in the packet there. We had agreed on adding in the workforce housing policy, which I provided with edits, that first piece about that the IDA will not deliver incentives to housing projects that include short-term rentals. Mm-hmm. So that was sort of signed off at the last Housing Committee meeting. I put the language in there. And then the other piece was that it was agreed that Nels and I would sort of come up with that additional fee or payment if an applicant wanted to pay that housing policy fee over the first 3 years of operation. So Nels and I did have a little bit of email back and forth, and we were leaning towards a 10% fee that could either be paid. We had two different scenarios, one where it could be paid where we would require at least 10% of the housing fee paid on closing. And then if they split the rest of the fee over the first 3 years of operation, they would pay an additional 10% on that fee each of those 3 years. And then the other option that we discussed was not requiring the 10% down payment at closing and just letting them pay over the first 3 years of operation with a 10% additional fee over those first 3 years of operation. So John was in on the email back and forth, and he suggested capitalizing interest and making the fee higher so that it would at least be similar to if they had to finance it through a bank. Mm-hmm. So I do have, those scenarios I'd like to talk through with you a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and share the couple of scenarios that Nels and I talked about. First,
Heather, while you're pulling that up, I think it makes sense to identify the kind of the two major objectives we were discussing about that deferred payment structure. And one was to make sure it was administratively simple to administer and keep it simple, not too complex. And the second one was trying to set up a system in which we're not incentivizing developers for deferring the payment, because we want those monies to go in the housing fund so we can have some affordable housing as soon as possible as a result of the fee. So I think those are the two, kind of twin goals we're trying to hit.
That's right. I think I'm just sharing the wrong document.
Yeah, you're sharing that one.
I want to share book one.
No, I think that's what you're doing, right? You see how there's the green outline around book one?
Can you all see that?
Yes.
Book one, project example.
Yes.
Oh, good. So here I just threw some numbers in for the Ironworks project, just to have sort of a real project. Project cost $39 million. The value of their incentive was about 4.8 million. This is one that got the enhanced energy incentive. So it would have been a little bit higher than a regular incentive. I'm going to go ahead and admit Shauna there. The value of the incentive was about 12% of project costs. Usually our incentive value with the sales tax, the property tax, the mortgage recording tax is somewhere between 10 and 12, 15% of project costs. The housing payment on this particular project was $645,000. It's about 13% of the total value of the incentive being provided. I mean, basically by us requiring an additional payment, it's reducing their incentive, which I think is a key thing here, that the reason that the IDA is providing incentive is a lot of times we have seen project after project is not financially feasible without some incentive. And when this body talked in quite detail about increasing the incentive or trying to incentivize developers to do the energy efficiency stuff, we increased the incentive quite significantly. I mean, almost doubled the property tax incentive to help defray the costs of doing that, to make it possible for developers to do that. We haven't done that here with the housing policy. We've just assessed an additional fee. So for a project like this at closing, a $39 million project, their fees would have been almost $390,000. We minus out some of the soft costs. So I'm going to say it was $380,000 paid at closing, plus a third of that on top of it paid in attorney's fees. So, there are some significant costs they're outlaying up front that, they're likely financing.
Can I ask a quick question here? So have you already subtracted the fees from the value of incentive somewhere?
No.
So basically they're at closing, there's a fee. So really the incentive is worth, $380,000 less than what you have up here. Because, really that's like the net value of the incentive is just like, what do you actually get?
Well, actually it would be, minus the, I'm not even going to go there. It would be minus the attorney's fees as well.
Right.
I mean, and then they have attorney's fees on their end. Like I never include all of that. I mean, if you want to compare apples and apples, I don't really include, but I'm sort of just giving that background that, there are upfront costs and upfront fees that, reduce the value right away. So option one that Nelson and I looked at was this 10% of the payment collected as a fee in each of those first 3 years. So you'll see this, the closing, there's no fee. Year 1, year 2 is construction. Year 3, 4, and 5 essentially would be the first 3 years of operation. Split that $645,000 fee over 3 years with a 10% sort of kicker. They end up paying $709 $4,500 instead of the $645. Option 2, they pay 10% at closing. And then those first 2 years are construction. The remainder is paid over years 3, 4, and 5. With that 10% fee, they end up paying about $703,000. So, it's a little bit more if they choose to pay over time. The reason that the housing committee had really talked about an ability to pay over time was that for some of these projects, and we're starting to see it even more, is that the financing is pretty tight. It's so that we were able to give them an option whether they wanted to pay. If they had to pay the fee up front, they're either going to have to increase their equity or finance it, take out more financing, either do that, or if they could pay over the first 3 years of operation, they could pay out of operations rather than borrowing additional funds. And on some projects, we're seeing that the banks aren't lending 80% or 70% loan to value. So we are seeing outside of this housing projects and projects in general having a hard time securing financing. The project in my parking lot is a really prime example. I mean, they are fighting their fingernails. They're not able to secure financing because the costs have increased so much. And I think we're going to see a little bit more of that. So that was sort of the reasoning when we adopted this policy. There was a lot of discussion at the committee. The policy is going to say at closing. However, if they want to pay over that first 3 years of operation, we'll allow them to do that. So that's what Nels and I sort of looked at. And then I'm going to go and stop this share, and I'm going to share the other option that John presented.
Heather, can we pause for a quick second? Todd, is your question pertaining to this specific financial model?
Yes, it does, Jack.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I was wondering, so the benefit we're giving them is an instant benefit. They're not losing value on the benefit. That's just a different way to look at it. They're not going to lose value in it because they're getting it. They're getting it up front. They'll have the same costs, legal fees and everything else, no matter what happens, whether they get it or not. All we're doing is taking money away from what we could be using toward the housing, toward the affordable housing. That's my take on it.
Well, no, not exactly, right? Because so the incentive doesn't actually really meaningfully get delivered until there's something built, right? Because essentially, like when they close, they still have the same piece of dirt they had to begin with. And so, they're not yielding any new income. They haven't increased the taxable value of the parcel at all. So really the incentive doesn't actually start until that first year of operation when the project is phased in and they're paying, the first 10%, or I guess, no, the first year is 100% abatement. So they're paying the sort of still paying the previous taxes. So that's where they get that first piece of incentive. So I think the structure makes a lot of sense to let them defer because, to Heather's point, it's like cash up front is much harder to come by than cash once you start actually receiving rents and operating the building. I think the salient question is just, like some developers will have the pockets and the equity to pay up front. Other developers will have to pay later. There should be a difference between those two structures, creating essentially an incentive for people to get the money into the housing fund as soon as possible, right?
Okay.
So
Thanks,
it's almost like we're sort of reversing that and saying, yes, we're disincentivizing paying later. Really, we're incentivizing paying sooner.
Okay.
Kind of same thing.
I wanted to just address Scott's question too. The IDA doesn't provide a financial incentive in terms of like giving them cash. I mean, it's all savings, and most of the savings comes over the 10 years of that property tax incentive.
Yes.
I mean, they're paying less than the full assessment. So
Thank you.
I'm going to go ahead and share the other one.
It's just behind.
Oh, thank you. All right, this is what John sent over to me. Can everyone see that? You've got an interest rate of 6.5%. The principal balance payment was supposed to be 645,000. John, you might be better. Let's see.
Yeah.
So here was the balance at closing. They paid 10% down. Here was the balance after they paid the 10% at closing.
Right.
In year one, we're capitalizing interest. In year two, we're starting to split that payment once it's in operation.
Yeah, so what you actually have here on the left set of two columns is in the case that they pay nothing at closing, and the right set of two columns is in the case that they pay 10% at closing. And this is just a straight line amortization at 6.5%. So, essentially equal payments in years 2, 3, and 4, or 2, 3, and 4 years after closing, I should say. And then, on the right, it's 10% down and then straight line payments years 2, 3, and 4. So, I would be in support of really actually maintaining multiple scenarios, because you might have some folks that say, oh, I'll pay $65,000 today to save a total of, 10 grand. And you'll have other folks who are like, no, I really want to conserve capital, and I'll pay a little bit more.
Could you explain this again? Because I don't understand this. I couldn't even implement it because I don't get it.
Right. So essentially what it's saying is this is a standard amortization table where basically your interest rate
So that's
increases
if
your
they
balance of
pay,
whatever's
or if they
unpaid.
don't pay.
Exactly.
I answered
So
my question.
yeah, on the left, the payment column or the 10% down column is what the payment in that year would be.
Right.
And then, the balance is sort of the principal balance, as if, you were tracking principal like a mortgage or any other debt instrument. And, basically the bottom line of this is that it's very similar, I think, to the other model, except that the penalty is larger. Since I wrote this, interestingly, interest rates have skyrocketed. Residential mortgage right now is rating at about 7%, which when I wrote this, that was about 3%. It's trivial to change this. All you have to do is change the interest rate at the top, and you can put these payments in a schedule in the document. And, it's just you literally just enter the factors, and it will update for you, and then you just schedule out those payments in the document. One of the other things that I think that we should talk about is whether or not we're talking about the payments starting at commencement of operations or at a date certain, a certain number of years after closing. As we've seen, many projects slip for a variety of reasons. And I actually think it's important to preserve it starts when they're operating, because that's the whole point, is to try to conserve their cash. But if that takes 10 years, what do we do?
Well, and see, here's the thing I want to go back to. It has to be simple.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone estimates when they're going to finish construction, when they're going to be done.
Exactly.
And, construction is sticky, this, and, things happen. So even with the best of intention, they might say, I'm going to be done in August, but they're not done until January. Or then, we have something like Library Place that was paused, and that was paused because of financial issues. And, they finally are able financially to start that project up again. If we're putting an amortization schedule in a closing document, we have to go, and they have to pay attorney's fees, and they have to pay our attorney's fees. And it's my time to amend the documents every time there's a delay or something happens. That's not easy.
Right. What do we do with the actual incentive? What does it say about the incentive, like when that starts? That's a date certain in the document, right?
It is a tax year certain. So there's a little bit of wiggle. If for some reason they really get off schedule, we have to amend the documents. We have to go back and fix everything. My preference is to keep it really simple. I mean, I understand where you want to tie it to an interest rate and an amortization schedule and all of that. But we've got 58 active projects right now. And it's like just the admin piece on adding more, it worries me.
Right. And I guess my proposal for that really is just that you keep this spreadsheet in your pocket and you use it, but you put those dates or those amounts and those dates just on a simple fee schedule. It's not an amortization table anymore in the document. It just says, you'll pay, $64,500 at closing, and then you'll pay $233,000 on this date.
Yeah, but what
$233,000
happens
on that date.
when it becomes 4 years after closing?
Right. Well, I mean, that if you already have to amend the document because it's the tax year certain and it shifted, then at that point you have the opportunity to recalculate.
But how do I don't even know how to add years onto this.
I mean, I can show you, that's really easy.
Yeah, my preference as a staff person would be to set a specific dollar amount. Nels and I, and that's why we came up with the very simple tack on a 10% or whatever it is. And I'm just staff. I've only been doing this for 15 years. My background's in affordable housing. I know how to, do a pro forma on a construction project and all of that. The thing that I'm having a really hard time with is how much can you continue to ask developers to pay before they're like, yeah, I'm done, I'm out, I'm not going to be able to do this project. And, just talking about the Ironworks project, 1% of adding 1% onto your project costs as a fee for affordable housing, that's a great community benefit. Do you know what that does to your financing structure, your ability to finance, what it does to your return on investment? That project in particular, their return on investment was nearing zero in the first 3 years.
Understood.
So, there comes a tipping point where we're not going to get any housing through the IDA. And that's where I want to make that sort of statement that it's going to be a balance.
Yep. We've got a couple of hands raised. We'll go Nels, Todd, then Rich.
Okay, yeah, and I'm kind of revisiting some of the discussions we had before between when Heather and I talked and then John and I talked. And I thought there was, benefits to both sides of those two proposals. John really is making sure that there's not a incentive to not pay upfront at closing and make sure that there's kind of a commercially reasonable interest rate to that value of deferring the payment. And Heather's trying to make sure it's simple and can be administered fairly and quickly and without a lot of errors, because I know the IDAs get audited and are being investigated all the time by state agencies that want to keep a real close look on them. So I had a third approach, which has some of the elements of both of those projects, which was a binary choice for a developer to either pay the fee up front, and you always have that option, but the alternative would be to pay basically a deferment fee or a convenience fee to defer the fees, a payment up front, and it could be 15 to 20% of the full housing payment. Then there would be 1/3 of the payment due over the first 3 years of operations. So it gets close to what John is trying to do by having a fixed number up front that is close to something like, if it was 20%, it would be almost exactly 6%, 6.5%, because we were doing those numbers. A 20% convenience fee paid up front puts money in the housing fund and gives the developer a choice, which is basically a commercially, it's a financially break-even kind of proposition for the most part. Yeah. But it provides some simplicity because we can use the same language Heather was talking about the payments are triggered when they're the first 3 years of operation, and they're the same amount, no matter when. But you have an upfront fee, which is trying to get at that issue of covering the time value of money. It's just built into a fixed fee, so it can be simple to administer. Getting the right number could be a trick. 20% is a big number up front, but it does work out to about 6.5% over the first 5 years of operation. So it's another option to look at, which tries to find the best of both those proposals.
Thank you, Nels. Todd?
Yeah, I like what Nels is saying there, and you too, John, with that upfront cost, because they're going to build the project, they're going to do it. Get that upfront cost first, or substantial, I think is huge. And keeping them honest, keeping them there, keeping them, I mean, if you make it too easy for them, then they're not gonna have to drive to finish it. You know, because I mean, you see it in the papers all the time. There's certain people that are so late in paying taxes, for instance, you know, because they know they can make more money with the money someplace else, and they let things slide because the penalties aren't that hard, aren't that tough. I see it all the time in the construction world. I think it's a great idea about getting as much as you can up front first. And then when it comes to, when Heather mentioned about the time consuming they should have, you know, having to redo these applications or numbers, can't we put something into the contract where if you, because of your delays, if we need to redo this stuff, there's gonna be fees assessed for the handling for the time. Or we
I mean,
could
they
put a dollar
certainly pay
amount on
our
it.
legal fees, anytime, anything that happens over the life of the abatement, they pay our legal fees. So, if we sue them, they pay us to sue them. So, I
Okay.
think that there already is something like that in our contract.
Okay,
Yeah, and I would say that the reason every project that's been delayed
Yeah.
has been delayed because of financing issues. I mean, do you really
Oh.
want to kick them while they're down?
We had one that fired their general contractor in the middle. That was a little different.
Yeah.
Rich, you want to go ahead?
That's different.
Yeah,
We'll
thanks.
see every configuration of things going sideways.
Thanks for letting me speak at the meeting. I've been thinking about this, and particularly what Heather was saying about hitting this point where we're getting the maximum value out of these developers while we're not killing the project. There's no jobs that come out of a project that doesn't get built, and there's no tax base increase, all of that.
Yeah.
And frankly, I think we've lived through a golden age of development in our communities, starting, say, with the Hilton Garden Inn. I forget what year that was, but we have seen steady growth in these large projects up until the pandemic. And I'm not entirely certain. I mean, we've got projects going now, but if you look at them, certainly Library Place has really struggled. I know the conference center is very tight. Gun Hill has been a problem. Todd Fox up on South Hill, his project, I know he's run into some trouble. I think he's getting it done. I don't know if we're in the same environment now. And we have to be, thoughtful about this. I do like what you're talking about with giving the developers options. You pay us the money, we'll take these different structures, pick one, but you're gonna have to live with it. So yes, with all that said, thanks.
Excellent, thanks, Rich. So we have a suggestion on the floor from Nels, which, I guess maybe if we want to take like just a little straw poll for say, 20% upfront and then fee in 1/3 equal increments of the original fee over each of the first 3 years of operation. So if we had an example project that had a $600,000 fee, they'd pay us $120,000 at close, and then $200,000 in each of years 1, 2, and 3 of operation. I think that's a good structure. I think it gets to everything that we're trying to accomplish here. Can we just kind of go around the room and get thoughts on that? I'll start with you, Shauna, because we haven't heard from you yet.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I mean, it allows for flexibility, and it allows also for them to do what's best for them, the developer financially. So sounds like a win-win to me.
Okay. Todd, what do you think?
I agree. It does sound like a win-win.
Jennifer?
Yeah, I agree. I think that works out for both. I think that's a great option.
Nels, I'm not going to ask you because it was your idea. Rich, what do you think?
Just for clarity, that would be a choice?
Yeah, they could either pay the full fee upfront, or they can pay 20% now and then essentially 33% in each of years 1, 2, and 3 of operation.
Yeah, I would
With
say
the 20% fee.
They paid the 20% fee at the front, essentially. Right.
So you're really doing
a
four
total
payments.
of 120%. They just do it 20% now, and then 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 in each of the first 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah, I just don't know if you're right on the edge on financing, and it's these are all about cash flow, if that $120,000 payment would be a sticker or not. I mean, it's a fair bump. I don't know. I would feel more comfortable if you gave the developer options. You said you can use this method, that method, or this, this third one. Pick one, but you're going to live with it.
Right.
It
So
could be that we set an interest rate every year.
I'm sorry, I just talked over you there. What did you say?
It could be we pick an interest rate every year, that we look at the market and see what a reasonable
Right.
interest rate is. They effectively would have a variable rate. I know Heather would not like the
Heather's
administration.
going to hate us if we do that. I mean, so Rich, would you like, you're essentially proposing that there might be a third option where there's no payment up front and then they pay more somehow over time. And I don't know, I mean, how we would pick a number for that, but you would be okay with something that was yet more, where they're paying 130% or 140%, but they were doing it starting later or something like that.
I don't know, the 20% seems like a fair addition to the cost, but
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's
a lot of
one
money,
of the other
20%.
things that's really on my mind in all of this, it's like, we have an acute housing crisis right now. And it's like every dollar we get into the community housing development fund right now means units, in a few years, and you wait, 3 years to even get it in there. And then, time after that for projects to get approved and financed and built. And it's like, if you push that out by 3 years, you're not getting that affordable housing for 7, 8, I don't know exactly how long, but it's a long time. And so, in my mind, anything that gets us at least something up front gets us like that much further ahead on trying to solve our acute housing crisis today. So I really like a structure that has an upfront, some amount of upfront to get us somewhere on that.
No, you're absolutely right, John. The concern, though, is that you're then going to raise the rents in the particular project because they have to get their $120,000 back.
So I wonder if, this policy, we're going to look at it every year, and it is policy. The IDA has the ability to deviate from its policy, and if there's discussion about it, what if we start with this policy with the 20% down payment and, see how that works with the pro formas and projects that are coming in, see how that goes. If I'm working with an applicant and it just really, it reduces their ROI or, they're not able to secure the financing if it's that tight, and they come in and they make the case, we can look at it on a case by case, and that might inform having to change the policy.
Right.
But at least start with that 20% down so that, we have the ability to at least get some funding into that fund.
Yeah, I like that approach. And I think that, if we're providing people with there's these two options, I think there's a certain you look at the options in front of you and try to make them work. That's kind of the nature of development is financial engineering. So I think that we're more likely to see people pick one of these options than try to do something entirely outside the box. But of course, we have the authority to do whatever we want. So I like that approach. So to be clear, I guess this would be just a minor change from what Heather had already written. Let's see what you have here. Made in equal installments during the first 3 years of operation. However, a processing fee of 20% of the payment amount would be paid at closing. Would be what you would write in there, right? So if you just change 10%.
I would say a processing fee of 20% of the payment amount will be assessed at closing.
Right. Yeah.
I'm fine with that.
Okay, excellent. It sounded like everybody was in support. Nels, you want to speak? You're on mute.
There we go. The term processing fee seems imprecise for what it is. It seems more like a deferment fee or something, or a convenience fee. It's not really
like
processing
deferment
cost. I just wonder if there's a better term to use
Deferment
there.
fee?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay. Okay.
I know it's valuable, but I don't know about 20%.
So I can go ahead and change that, and I'll just send it to the IDA at their next meeting for approval coming out of committee. Okay.
And we didn't have any comment or anything about the other changes in here, which were pretty minor. except for the thing with the short term, which I think we have some new committee members since then, but that I think we'd all seemed non-controversial, I
We
guess I'll
wanted to
say.
make sure that that there wasn't short-term rentals that were being incentivized.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And I mean, to be clear, like we would incentivize a hotel project, have done so in the past. It's just that's a commercial project as opposed to a residential project. Okay, let's see. So coming back to our agenda, the only other thing on our agenda today was the minutes of the last meeting,
And those were
which
just
were
informational.
informational.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much what we've got here. Does anybody have any other business that they'd like to address today? Okay, excellent. Well, thank you all for your time. This feels like it was pretty productive. And I look forward to seeing most of you at our next IDA meeting.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, John.